Support this podcast at patreon.com/Kris Karl Photography Podcast. As I just mentioned before we started the podcast, you're the reason that I actually took the plunge and finally shot some portrait for portraits. But before we get into the fact that you forced me so viciously to part with my money to buy portrait, let's get a start with how you got into photography. What was it that made you pick up a camera for the first time?
Yeah, so first time I ever sort of really got into photography, I was heading on a trip to Japan, and I went twice the 2 years beforehand to go snowboarding. And every time my friend had like a really shitty little sort of point and shoot digital camera. And I really liked the photos that I was getting out of that because it was about 2015 and my iPhone was terrible. So I was just taking bad photos. And then I just kept seeing people on Instagram doing cool stuff. And I just decided before I go to Japan, I'll just buy a camera. And then from then on, it's just sort of been a deep dive and cost me a bunch of money, and I've fallen in love with it.
And so obviously that's quite recent. What's the push for you to shoot film?
When I was doing it, I bought just like a really cheap entry level DSLR, and I just kept watching. This was probably back in 2016. I was watching a few sort of old Digital Rev TV videos, and they were talking about film and doing stuff. And I just decided to have a look in. Asked my dad if he had an old film camera, and he did. And I grabbed one and just shot a roll of film, and it was absolutely terrible. But I still really liked the results. So it was just like this underexposed. It turned out really bad, but I thought it was really cool. So from there, I then bought a camera off eBay, and then, yeah, just slowly but surely just kept buying cameras and shooting film and doing more and more with it. And then to the point now where I pretty much have all my digital camera stuff and I barely use it because all I try to do is shoot film. So it was mainly just seeing other people do it on YouTube and stuff like that.
So is it the process or the end result that sort of matters more when it comes to shooting film for you?
I think for me, I prefer using a film camera in the sense of the way you shoot with a film camera. Like whenever I got a Sony A7 III, and whenever I use it, I don't really like the actual the feel of the camera when I'm taking photos or through the viewfinder or anything like that. Whereas when I go out with a camera, if it's got a rangefinder, there's something really nice about looking through it. Or even with the old SLRs, they were nice, but whenever you look at digital SLRs, they were so ugly and big and the lenses were massive. It was just a hassle to take it out. So I think it's more actually the camera that I have and being able to go out with it and like the way that I use it and that sort of process more than, the process of, it takes time to get the film back and stuff. If I could get the film back like immediately, I would. I always like to rush through that. And then just the colors and the process and the way that the images turn out, I really like that. And I hate editing, so it's a lot easier on that end as well.
Do you know what? I was actually saying the same thing on my last podcast about one of my motivations for picking up a film camera, and obviously lockdown has motivated me to do a lot of stuff because we're all bored out of our minds. But I'm so sick of the ever-changing standards of retouching, and in a lot of cases, I really just don't like any retouching trends that are happening probably in the last 5 years. So one of the great things about film is that it kind of removes a lot of that problem for me. So I completely agree. Let's talk about portraiture for a second. What is it that motivates you to shoot portraits?
I don't know. It's just kind of like, I always found it was easier to get a really good result from a portrait than it is to go and hunt for a really good sort of documentation or documentary photo or landscape or something like that around. So I thought it was like a good, easy way to get nice photos that I enjoyed. And the other thing I really like about it is I love meeting people and talking. So it's like a good, fun way for me to get out and meet people and have fun. So it's more like, I don't know, it's just, you can walk around for hours and never really see a photo that you like. Whereas if you go on a portrait session, I find that you can get, a few photos that are good solid portraits straight off the bat, and then you can experiment, you can do weird things, you can try different poses and all this different stuff. It gives you a really good way to get photos that I find interesting and stuff like that for me. So
what was your first portrait shoot like?
I don't know. Well, I don't really, with my portrait shoots, it's more like, they're not like a portrait shoot where someone reaches out and they go, oh, how much for portraits and blah, blah, blah. It's normally I bump into someone or I know someone. So most of my portraits that I actually have on my Instagram and stuff are just friends and people that I actually know. So a lot of the time it's just like I'm out with friends and I'm like, oh, hey, can we take some photos? I want to finish some film. And they'll be like, oh, yeah, okay. So I'd sit them down and I go, oh, let's try this and let's do that. And then it's just out with friends having sort of fun and doing that sort of stuff.
So you're not often photographing people that are used to being in front of a camera, or do they actually do that separately from, is modeling their thing?
So a lot of the people, a couple of them are freelance models and they do modeling on the side, but I've never really shot with I've only ever done it once or twice, but like models like who work, like make a living off modeling and stuff like that. So it's really different working with that. I worked with one guy and it was just like he threw out a pose every second. Every time the shutter clicked, it was just different pose, different thing. And then with all the people that I work with, they're just like people who like to be creative and like to do fun things and creative stuff. So we just go out and we go, all right, let's have a look at some different shoots. Let's make a mood board. Let's see what you like. And then from there we work and go, all right, let's try this pose. And I do a lot of directing and telling them how to pose and like what to do and different things like that. So it is kind of like a lot of people that don't really know how to model or don't do much modeling at all.
I did kind of jump in there. I apologize. Going back to your first shoot, how was it?
Good. I think, yeah, because when it's with friends and stuff, it's really easy. Like a lot of the time, if the results come back good or bad, no one really cares. It's just a fun thing. So it wasn't like a super stressful, it's not like a wedding. Whereas if you're like, oh, I made a few mistakes, haha, that's right. Like super stressful and bad. So with friends and stuff like that, it's super cruisy. I can just do whatever. I go, all right, sit here, we'll try this. And that's one of the things I like to do is I do a lot of stuff with people and we just try a lot of really weird sort of poses and different things and playing with mirrors and doing all sorts of stuff like that to try and do different and interesting, more editorial style shoots. But then it's a bit of a pain when you've got no stylist, no like makeup or anything. It's just you and the person and they've never really done any modeling or anything. So, but it all seems to work out pretty well in the end.
You're producing some fantastic work, especially I wouldn't have guessed that, you weren't always working with people that are used to being in front of a camera. So what's your secret to getting people comfortable in front of your camera?
I do it all sort of mainly nowadays with the Pentax 6.7. So it's like, I just talk to them about film and then, I load up the camera, they see me load it and we just talk and chat. And then a lot of what I do is, or what we like to do is we save a bunch of posts and different things of like a mood board, I guess. And then we'll refer to that and go, okay, so what do we like? What's this? And then we'll sit down and then a lot of the time I end up sort of doing the poses with them as well. Like I'll sit there and I'll go, put your hand here like this and show them by doing it myself because I just kind of find that sort of tactile seeing what someone else is doing helps them to see it. So yeah, just talking, chatting, just being super cruisy and then just taking our time. We're never in a rush. We're never like, we got to get 50 photos by this with this many outfits. It's like, oh, let's see what happens and just take it super cruisy. And then everyone kind of gets pretty comfortable. It works out pretty well.
What's your idea of like a really good portrait subject in terms of their sort of attitude and like you mentioned earlier, someone that's really quick fire posy being a little bit off-putting. What's the perfect sort of portrait subject for you?
For me, it's just someone who wants to try interesting things. I think if someone's sitting there going, oh, if they're worried about if they look goofy or if something doesn't quite work out, I find that's a bit harder because then they're more worried, like and it makes it a bit more stiff. Whereas sometimes I'll just go, oh, do this and we'll take the photo and then get them back. You're like, oh, it looks terrible. But when you do all these weird poses every now and again, you get something that sometimes works out, try different things. And it's just easier when they're really cruisy and just I can take my time, especially with the Pentax, because it's like with the medium format film, you don't want to rush through everything. Like you could if you wanted to, but it's nice to take time, have a look, take a light meter reading, see what's going on, look at the background. And so as long as they're willing to try sort of interesting things, or they're not too worried about if they look silly doing it, then I think it works out pretty well. And that's sort of something that I like in a subject.
And your website is broken down into a few different genres. I think it's like people, places, parties, and I feel like there's another P and I'm forgetting it.
Yeah, it's products.
Thank you so much. That was going to bug me otherwise. Obviously, you're a big fan of alliteration, but that aside, do you find that your skill set can translate between those genres like quite evenly and quite simply, or do you have to be a different photographer for each one of those genres?
I think it's pretty works out pretty even. Like for, a lot of it is just on the website for work things, but it's mainly the places and people that I like. And you know, I think that's one of the things that I find combine really well together. Whenever I do a portrait shoot, it's never like, oh, let's just go here and take portraits. It's like, all right, let's look up somewhere and then we'll drive an hour or something and we'll be in the middle of nowhere. And while I'm there, I'll take some other photos and bits and pieces like that. So I like going to interesting places and trying to incorporate that sort of environmental portraiture sort of stuff. So I enjoy that a lot. And then it's sort of, I think it makes for a more whole image. Like when you get a really clean, nice portrait, it looks really good. But for me, I really like seeing a really nice environmental portrait, or when there's a bit of something else going on around them and there's other things. And, you know, for me, I like to go out and go to different places and just explore and do that kind of stuff. So I feel like I don't really have to be a different photographer for each one. I mean, I'll shoot with like a lot of vastly different settings when I do that. Like I love to shoot f11 for a lot of my stuff where it's landscapey sort of, or pictures of houses or other stuff like that. And then I'll always shoot just like wide open for portraits, which is a bit of a bad habit that I have. But yeah, so.
I mean, obviously, I think one of the hardest skills with portraits is to contextualize the subject and to put them into some kind of context for the viewer to see more of a narrative about them than just here's what the person looks like. I think that's quite often lost with people that do portraiture. When it comes to shooting places, one thing I really struggle with is finding like a different composition than what the obvious thing would be when you walk into a scene. So I think that's one of your biggest strengths, is just that ability to kind of find alternative compositions than what I would have gone for as my main shot. Where did you learn sort of your landscape or your location shooting?
Really just everything I've learned is all been sort of YouTube, Instagram or anything like that. So I think just looking at what a lot of other people do in terms of seeing a lot of other people's works. Like lately I've been trying to get into photo books to try and learn, because I feel like I have no idea what makes me choose to take a photo. Like I understand composition, but I never think about it when I go to take a photo. I don't sit there and go, well, this composition and these things. I just look at something and go, well, that's kind of interesting. Or I like the light there. And then I'll just try to hone in on that, or do a different, like try to find some way to take a photo of what it is that interests me. But I find a lot of the time I get some really bad photos, but I think I'm not afraid to just shoot lots of sort of photos of a similar scene and just get a few different things from the same spot to try and get one shot or one thing that I like.
Are you someone that kind of sort of pre-scouts something, or goes in with a very strong pre-visualized idea, a lot of planning going into it, or are you just reading whatever you're seeing at the time?
Yeah, I just read whatever I see. I just go somewhere. I wouldn't have even looked at, you know how you can look at Instagram, like location tags, won't look at that. I'll just go, oh yeah, that looks kind of nice, and go down there and just start doing photos or doing stuff. And I find myself a lot of the time though, driving past things that I really like and going, oh, damn it, I wish I could stop there and take a photo of that, or I'll stop back there or come back later. And I just never do for like months or years or whatever. But it's most of the time I just walk around or go to a place and go, oh, this might be interesting, and see what pops up. And if something good pops up, I'll take a photo of it. And then, a lot of the time I like looking these days at light. If I see the light in a way that I really like, I'll try to get around that in that area. That sort of is what's leading me to a lot of different photos these days.
So I'm going to try and remember this so I get this right. So it's people, places, parties, and products. Which one do you sort of actually prefer doing in terms of the shooting part?
I hate parties these days because that's all like event photography and digital work stuff, and I don't really enjoy that. So it's pretty much just people is sort of my favorite to actually shoot. It's good fun to plan out the shoot and then meet the person, talk to them, catch up. A lot of the times it's the same people that I'm friends with and go, oh, hey, like good to catch up with people and see what they've been up to. And then it's just like a good, fun way for me to get out with the camera and do stuff. So I think, yeah, people and places are the two fun ones. And then products and parties are just boring work stuff that I don't really enjoy that much.
If it's okay to talk about film for a bit, how do you know when you're in a color environment or a black and white environment? What makes you pick one or the other?
If it's really sort of overcast or really quite like muted, not very nice light, a lot of the times I'll try to get a black and white. But for the longest time, it was pretty much all color because for me, like getting everything done at a lab, color was so much cheaper than black and white. And that was like a big driving factor for me, was just, it was so much cheaper to just get the color. So I just go out and shoot color all the time. But I'm not a huge fan of just necessarily compositions. I really like light and sort of the way that it works. And for me, the best way or the way that I like to see that is with color, like really nice light colors and sunset and the way that the light works towards the end of the day. And that's a lot of the time when I go out and shoot. So for me, if it's, late in the day, color, if it's really overcast and sort of not that much light going on, I'll try some black and white or do that. So, but I know it might change. It's just sort of whatever film I've got in the fridge generally. If I'm running low on something or I've done a big shoot, then if something's like color's missing, then I'll shoot some black and white or yeah.
And, I think we've already kind of covered the ground, but what for you, especially I'm talking in the process, not so much the end result, but what's the benefit of shooting film? Because obviously if you look at shooting film from the outside, especially as a lot of people now start photography with digital, you're so much more limited with film in terms of, you're limited in the number of shots, you're limited in the ISO, there's no movement on the ISO, you're limited in the sense of you can't switch between film stock. So what is it that the benefit for you in terms of shooting film?
I think it makes you think. Like if I have my Sony out and I go to take photos, I'll generally have a zoom lens and, you can do anything and everything with that camera within that shot. But when you have the film, it kind of makes you really think about it. Like for me, I'll go, how do I want to shoot this? If I want to shoot at f11 with the Pentax late at night or like late in the afternoon when the sun's going down, I won't have enough light. So it's like, do I need to bring a tripod? Do I need to do this? Do I need my shutter release cable? So I think it just sort of makes you think about the shots and the way you go about it sort of a lot more. Plus, like, you just shoot so many photos with digital. When I go out with a digital camera, it's like I'll come back from a walk and I'll have like 100 photos. I'm like, oh, great. Now I got to go through 100 photos and do this. Whereas with the film, if it's 35 millimeter, you're limited to your 36. So it kind of makes you think and just take that second to look at the scene before you take the photo. Like even if you do that with a digital, I find I still take multiple photos anyway because I go, oh, might as well just have it in case one's better than the other. And so I think that sort of lack of like being actually confined by settings and different things like that makes you shoot a lot more and not necessarily think at all about it. And so for me, I don't think when I have the digital camera, and when I have the film, I actually think and I sort of try to go out and make the photos a little bit better.
Do you feel like, obviously with the multiple genres that you shoot, do you feel like developing photographers should shoot a lot of varied genres? So would that help their skill set? Or do you think sort of focusing in on one thing would actually help more?
I think when you're starting out, it's really good to just try a bunch of different things. Like you might not even know that you like doing something until you try it. Like when I started taking photos, it was all sort of landscapey style things. I was like, I didn't really like taking photos of people or with people. And I thought, I'm not going to do that. It's, the idea of being out in the street taking photos or doing a portrait shoot kind of felt weird to me. And then as time went on, like the more I tried different things, taking photos of my friends, doing this, trying different things, shooting at studios, like doing bits and pieces like that, I thought, oh, hang on, I actually like doing this. This is kind of interesting and a different way to do it. And then also it just makes you a better rounded photographer. Like if you can do all these different things and you've got different ways that you can move and different jobs that you can do. For me, like where I live, if you want to make money doing photography, which I don't really make any money at all doing photography, you have to be able to do all sorts of things because it's like there's not enough work in one genre. Like there's not that many straight up portrait photographers just doing straight up portraiture work, or there's not that many product photographers just doing product work like you would get if you're in, say, London or New York or Tokyo or somewhere where there's like lots of products. Where I am, it's quite a small population. There's not that much going on. So it makes it a lot harder to just be a specific one person. I just shoot one thing, I do the one thing only, that's it. So you kind of got to be really spread out and do lots of different genres of photography.
I mean, you mentioned sort of the locale of you know, I guess the restrictions of your location. What's the benefits of shooting in Australia? Because I'm assuming that you get some pretty damn good light and there's a lot of space.
Yeah, it's lots of good light, lots of space, and then like a lot of untouched sort of landscapey things. Like for me, I can just drive in 15 minutes and I'm in like lots of like long stretches of beaches where there's not anything going on. There's like, it's kind of like similar to that. Like if you look at photos from say the Pacific Northwest where they all look really wild and rugged and there's not many people there, you can drive not very far and find stuff like that really easily. And just, I think the light as well, like even in winter here, like it's winter at the moment and it's still light at like 5:30, 6 o'clock. It's not that cold. You can do a shoot at the beach if you want to. It's not crazy or anything like that. So just that really temperate weather, just you can go anywhere all the time. There's lots of light. It's really good and easy to do that. The one thing I don't like though is in summer, during the day, the light is really harsh. It's like pretty crazy sometimes. And that does sort of affect the photos. You go, oh, like it limits your window in the middle of the day. But you also don't want to be doing that because in the middle of summer, it's like 40 degrees and you don't want to be out taking photos in that heat. It's just a nightmare.
Yeah, no, that sounds like my worst nightmare as an Englishman. Let's talk about YouTube because that's how I found you. What was it that pushed you to start a YouTube channel in the first place?
I think it was just because like I realized the only way to make money here for me, like, and make a good living is to do all sorts of photography and a lot of stuff that I didn't really want to do. And I found myself just thinking like, oh, I've got no way that I can do like this as a living. Like I don't do photography as a living. I'm a landscaper and like I do all manual labor and stuff most of the week. And then I take photos on the side. And so for me, like I thought if I actually want to get out and be able to make photography my job and not end up hating it, I thought YouTube was a way to sort of actually be able to grow a community or try to get people interested in your work and be able to do fun sort of styles of photography and do that sort of stuff for a living rather than just going, yep, I have to be a wedding photographer if I want to make money with my camera, or I'm going to have to be a tradesman and do labor all day throughout the week and take photos on the side on the weekends. So for me, it was just kind of a good opportunity to potentially grow my photography career in a way that I kind of liked. And then it's a fun way to do things. Like I'd take a lot of photos that don't end up on Instagram. And I thought, well, why am I taking all these photos? Like I really like them, but they're not going anywhere. I'm not going to, like, there was no intentions of making a book or a publication or anything or printing or trying to do that because no one was really interested in it. So I thought if I can put them on YouTube, maybe people enjoy the other stuff that's not just portraits like I post on Instagram. And yeah, like it's a good fun thing to do. So I just kind of jumped in and started doing it.
And do you find that you're a different photographer on YouTube? Like when you're recording something that you know is going to end up on YouTube, do you feel like you tighten up a little bit in terms of, because obviously you're explaining yourself, I guess, and you're aware that you're being watched. I know, like from experience when I've taught, I certainly slightly modify the way that I am, and I become a lot more regimented because I know that I'm being watched, as opposed to normally where I'm honestly incredibly slapdash.
Yeah, it's kind of like I've noticed a way, or something that I'm trying to do is make videos now, especially when I do, like if I try to do a camera review or something, is try to be more scripted, because some of my old videos, like my first videos that I made, I review cameras and I just talk a bunch of shit for a long time. And at the end of it, I go, what was the point that I was trying to make? It was just like a really long tangent. Like I'll talk for days. I love to talk. So I try to cut myself down and just keep it more concise and informative and not just go on tangents. But then like the photos, it's really hard to try and go out and take photos and do a video. It's like, I'll see a photo and be like, oh, I want to take that. But then if I got my friend filming for me, I'll have to go, oh, I'm going to take a photo of this. Let's try to get a shot of me walking up to the scene and then take the photo, and then we'll get a video of the scene. And it's like when I'm normally walking around taking photos, I'm just walking. I'm like, oh, there's a shot. Click, there's a photo, boom, walk to the next spot. Okay, here's a shot, line it up, take it. So it's hard logistically because you have to try and record what you're doing. And, you know, it's a lot harder to take photos when you're trying to think of two things rather than just taking photos. So it's a little bit different. My style's a little bit different when I do that, but it still kind of works.
Do you feel like it's important to be transparent with something like YouTube? Because you're obviously, I guess in a sense you are teaching, and it's, I see there are certainly a lot of YouTube photography personalities that are certainly only showing the absolute best of the best and pretending that that's a regular thing. Yeah,
I think it's important to sort of just, a lot of people, they'll just take heaps of rolls of film and they'll burn through 5 or 6 rolls of film and put up, a few photos from each roll and it looks all good. I like to put a lot of photos out. Like if something's complete garbage or just doesn't look very good, I'll be like, oh, okay, there's no point in putting that in there because it's just like terrible. But I do think that that's something that I want to get better at, especially with talking and just like personal feelings and just being really transparent and sort of, I don't know how to put it, like when you see people be like their own self and they're not trying to change or do things to please everyone, it kind of comes across as a lot better content and people engage with it a lot more. So like there's a guy, Eduardo, I can't remember his last name, but he has a decent sized channel and he used to do this like one roll photography, and he'd go out and he'd take a photo, or he'd show every photo that he took with a roll and just record it all sort of with a GoPro or with a camera or something. And I really like watching that. It was interesting to see the way he'd try to frame up things or the way he'd shoot multiple scenes in different ways. And he was a really good street photographer as well. So the way he'd take street photos. But I mean, it's good to do that, but then sometimes people get really bored really quickly. And if they see the same photos over and over again, like if you're trying to do similar style photos all in one shoot, it can get kind of stale pretty quick. So it's kind of a tough blend to make engaging, interesting content and also be super transparent and showing everything that you're doing.
Yeah, it's a weird balance, right? Because you want to develop a style and you want to give people a consistent idea of what you're about, but you also don't want to repeat yourself. So it's like, when do you know you've hit the point that you're repeating yourself as opposed to establishing yourself?
Yeah, exactly. It's like, even when you watch content yourself, you're like, oh, I like knowing how the content's made. I watch it and I go, oh, this is kind of boring. Like I get sick of stuff, even though I know how hard it is to make and what to do. So it's like one of those things where it's so hard to get that perfect balance of showing mediocre shots and showing what actually happens and then being compelling and actually making an informative and interesting video that people like. So, yeah.
If I could ask you a bit of a broad question, obviously self-analysis is very difficult, but what would you say is your biggest weakness as a photographer?
I think like I know I said like shooting film makes me think more about a shot when I take it, but I still think that I don't take enough time with a lot of shots. Like I've been working on a little project that I've been doing around where I live, and I got a lot of the photos back and I realized that I just didn't get things perfectly parallel. And it's kind of annoying me a little bit, but I'm also like, oh, it's not the end of the world. But I'm looking at it and going, if I just had taken that extra 2 seconds to line things up and just made things a bit more parallel or technically nice, it would have just been just that slight bit nicer. So I think I don't think enough about a lot of shots. And as I said before, I don't really think about compositions and like what composition rules to use when I take photos. So for me, it's like, if I could get that as well, like get that a bit better, then maybe I'd have a few more photos which are just that little bit nicer compositionally and they work out well. And because a lot of the stuff I take isn't the fastest moving, it's not street photography. It's not like you have to get the shot right then and there. So I think I just need to take a little bit more time to make sure I've got everything a bit more perfect or a bit more precise. And that might make me a bit better. Or the other thing is I just shoot a lot of vertical photos because I'm so used to Instagram. Like the longest time, all I did was post on Instagram. So I have a lot of vertical compositions and my eyes are really trained for vertical compositions now. So I'm always looking for them because I know it looks a little nicer on Instagram, and that's a bad habit that I've got to sort of break.
And in terms of, I think, I don't know about for Australians, but for English people, the worst nightmare imaginable is someone asking you to compliment yourself. But what do you think your biggest strength is as a photographer?
Oh, yeah, that's, I don't know. Maybe just that I'm not afraid to experiment and try different things. And, you know, with portraits, just telling people, let's try this, let's do that. Like, I think a lot of people are worried that they'll get bad shots. And I don't think you should be worried about getting a bad shot if one of those weird shots that like you're trying could potentially be a good shot. So I think that's a strength, is I'm not worried about if I'm going to get a bunch of bad shots. I'll go, oh, well, you know, I learned something cool. Let's go. It doesn't bother me. So I think maybe that. I don't know. I'm not particularly fond of a lot of my work. So I see it and I go, oh yeah, it's a photo, but it never really blows my mind. So yeah, I don't know.
It's hard, right? I'm not a big fan of selling myself and you know, I'm not good at talking about any strengths that I have. So I always feel like that's a harder question than weaknesses. There's been times I've asked people what their weaknesses are and they've told me like 25 things. So yeah, it's always easier to be sort of self-critical than it is to be self-praising, I guess. In terms of like, I feel like we're in a very cliche sort of gimmicky world with photography. I think Instagram's given birth to a lot of weird and in a lot of cases, crappy photo cliches. Are there any that you're particularly not a fan of in terms of like gimmicks or sort of things you constantly see crop up on Instagram with photography? Yeah,
I think sort of the, you know, like the classic Sony photography, like the smoke bombs and the water splashes and the weird, like, just the stuff that you see when you first look at a camera, you go, whoa. And then it really sort of, you're like, when you've never taken a photo before, you're like, that's cool. But then once you see actual photography, you're like, oh, okay, that's kind of trash. Or the other thing is the film look, but like the really bad film look. I know for a long time, a lot of people were just adding heaps of dust to their photos. And that drove me insane because it was like, no one's trying to get a dusty film photo. They're trying to get really clean photos. And sometimes there's dust on there and it's just this abundance of dust, or the frame borders and it's a black and white photo and it's got portrait, or it's a color photo and it's got Tri-X. And you're like, okay, you could have at least tried. But yeah, you know, those ones are really annoying. But I think also there's those gimmicky photos probably the worst, because a lot of people sort of see that, and that's kind of really popular, especially with a lot of people that just shoot digital, and you see that kind of smoke bomb or the mask and you go, that to me just does nothing. That annoys me, that stuff.
It's kind of strange, right? Because it feels like, you know, film photography, the community seems to be a lot nicer from my brief experience compared to the digital community. And the digital community is very competitive in the sense of there's a lot of brand allegiance and there's a lot of people that are constantly sort of citing statistics and features about cameras. And if a camera can't do something that literally 2 weeks ago they'd never heard of, all of a sudden it's a completely trash camera. It's kind of weird to see that the last sort of 5 or 6 years has been a lot of digital ways, or a lot of ways for digital photographers to make their photos look more like they were shot on film. You just think, why don't you just shoot on film? Yeah,
it's like, it's not that hard. I think people get a bit intimidated by it. And it's like, it's really easy to make a good photo. It's just get a camera. If you understand basic exposure, put it in, put your color film in, take it to a cheap lab. It'll be a pretty decent photo. So it's like, even disposables, I had friends that were using disposables all the time. For a long period, they were really popular over here for people sort of 18 to 21 or something like that, going to parties and taking a lot of photos with disposables, but then would never want to then spend $50 or $100 and get a camera, they'd rather spend the $30 10 times and get the disposables all the time. So I don't know, it's just like, it's not that hard. I think it's intimidating to some people because they don't know they can't see what's going on, and it does cost money. But I think that's one of the good things about nowadays with the YouTube film community coming so big and prominent is a lot more people are trying. I see a lot of Facebook groups and stuff there looking for cheapish cameras and trying to do stuff. Only problem is now all the film cameras are so expensive. So, yeah.
That's a side effect, right, of it becoming popular, is that the prices jump through the roof. I remember talking to Jason from Grainy Days about the Contax T2 and the fact that the second that one of the Jenners showed it on Jimmy Fallon, all of a sudden the price went up like tenfold. And we're probably going to see a lot of that because it's becoming more and more like fashionable. So more and more celebrities will use stuff, which means, it'll become more expensive just by association.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. I'm kicking myself because I remember when I first started shooting film, I was sitting there going, 400 Australian dollars for a Contax T2. That's ridiculous. I'm not going to spend that much money on point and shoot. And now they're about, 1,200 to 1,500 Australian. It's like, damn, why did I not take that opportunity? I'm never going to be able to shoot with that camera or experience it or try it, let alone the fact that it's worth so much. It's like such a pain. Or like the Leica, like the M6 used to be like $1,000. Now it's like $3,500. It's like, cool. That's not going to happen. It's like a car price.
I think every photographer has some kind of horror story about gear that they could have got for cheap, but it wasn't like cheap, so they left it, and then the prices have skyrocketed. I remember being in Sussex in the south of England, and there was a really, I don't want to be mean, but a really shit independent camera shop, and in the window they had a Hasselblad X-Pan, and it was about 950 quid. And I just didn't have it on me, but I really wanted the camera. And I was like, I could stretch, like I could, move some money, but I don't want to, it's not responsible, blah, blah, blah. And now they're over here, they're now at like 3,500. And it just bums me out every time I think about it, because that's like an absolute dream camera for me. And I could have had it for so much cheaper than it's going now.
Yeah, I know. It happens all the time. I'm like, I see so many things from back in the day. I'm just like, why? Why, Lewis? Why didn't you do it? And like, I got a right deal the other day with my Mamiya 6, but like that's the closest I've got to a good sort of really expensive camera for like a good price. Or it was still relatively expensive, but yeah, it's just like so many little missed opportunities. Or you see people going through like thrift stores in America picking up like all these really ridiculous cameras, and you're like, oh, I've never seen a camera like at all basically at an op shop or a thrift shop here. It's like, I want that. I need that.
I mean, you've got a foot in both camps in the sense that you've also shot, or you also shoot digital. What do you think about the fact that it's something that I'm noticing is quite funny about digital versus film, in the sense that everyone that's shooting digital is trying to get up to the point that they're shooting full frame. But full frame in a film sense is kind of a bit of a meh sort of frame size. Everyone's pushing towards medium or large format. Yeah,
it's a bit interesting because it's like, now I look at 35 millimeter, I'm like, oh, I don't think of the work that I do on 35 millimeter as being potentially as good or good for prints or other stuff, just because I've done a few prints with medium format stuff and I'm like, oh, these are like ridiculously nice. And then when I've done a similar print with 35, it hasn't been anywhere near as good. And I think just the look that you get with them, like a 6x7 negative with like, or even 6x6 with the lens at 2.8, the separation and the feel and the way it looks is like, it's something else. Like you look at it and you go, oh, okay, yeah, this is like crazy. So it is kind of weird as well. Like with that, the digital, everyone's like, oh, full frame. And then you look at it, and then even with film, some of the people go like half frame, and it's almost like a more fun, interesting camera for like the little Olympus Pen FTs, like the half frame cameras. And it's like, it's half. And when you think about going to APS-C, you're like, like APS-C, like full frames where it's at. Like, yeah.
Again, I have to say thank you for taking the time to do this. I'll try and wrap up so that you can get on with your evening. Let me ask you this. Are you someone that plans what you want to be doing with photography, say in 2 years' time or 5 years' time? Or are you moving from sort of shoot to shoot? I know at the moment we're in kind of unprecedented times in the sense of it's hard to plan what you're going to have for breakfast the next day. But are you someone that's quite planned out ahead of time, or are you just kind of going with where it takes you?
I'm kind of more into just going where it takes me, because it's like, I've done times where I've been doing a lot of event photography, like around like Christmas, New Year, and I'll work like heaps for 3 or 4 weeks taking photos. And I'm just like, I hate this. Like, I don't want to pick up a camera. I don't want to do it. Like for me, I think the things that I want to try and work towards are more like not necessarily photography work goals, but photography like personal goals. Like I'm working on making a zine at the moment. And then once I've done that, that's like a one thing that I want to do. Then I want to go, okay, now I want to work on making some print worthy stuff and doing prints. And then I want to come back and look at doing more maybe zines or books, or trying to build a sort of more interesting body of work that I can put together and, make a bit more whole. Because at the moment, like a lot of the stuff I do, I think with portraiture, unless you're shooting really interesting subjects or sort of famous subjects, it's really hard to make a full body of work, like for a book or a zine or something to be viewed as a whole. With portraiture, it's more individual photos. Whereas I like the idea of working towards a big project or a big thing, or something where I can just sink my teeth into it for 6 months or a year or something like that. So I think that sort of direction would be something I'm more interested in working on as time goes on. But in terms of work and other stuff like that, it's like, if I can book some weddings and make some money, I can buy more cameras, that'll be cool. But nothing's like sticking out. I'm not going, I want to be the number one wedding photographer in my area or anything like that. So, yeah.
How do you find shooting weddings? Because obviously you said it's not like maybe what you'd want to be doing, if you had infinite resources, I guess. But how do you find it actually shooting weddings? Do you find it a fun challenge, or do you just find it stressful?
I've only, in my career, I don't really shoot many weddings. It's more like parties and stuff. I've done a couple, but for me, it's like, I think a wedding is more enjoyable for me than a party, because when a lot of 18th or 21st or like nights like that, you take the photos, and over here, it's like party hard. It's like, I've gone to so many parties where it's like the host or the person whose birthday it is just like passed out in the backyard somewhere halfway through the night. And then I'm just like, cool. No one really cares what I'm doing. Like, they don't give a shit about the photos. They just want to put them on Instagram on Monday or Tuesday after the weekend. So like, the thing I like about weddings, or when you do it, they're a bit stressful, but people actually enjoy the photos and they want good photos, and like, it's something that they'll have with them for a long time. So like weddings and stuff, I think for me, I like the idea of doing more weddings and more stuff like that, because it is important work that will stay with someone for a long time. Whereas a lot of other events, it's just like, oh yeah, cool, you got the photos, cool. It's good for promoting the next event or doing the next thing, or, doing whatever, and yada, 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 stuff like that. So
I guess the last question I want to ask you is about, it feels like you've been doing this for such a short amount of time, considering how much you've done and the standard of your work. It's almost, I want to be a little bit bitter towards you, but I won't be. How do you, if you could go back and talk to yourself at the start of other than telling yourself to buy that Contax T2, if you could go back and talk to yourself at the beginning of your sort of photographic journey, what advice would you give yourself?
Maybe just to look at more important like works by the greats, and like buy photo books and try to learn from that. Like recently, like learning everything through YouTube and stuff, I've been watching videos that people talk about photo books and picking all that sort of stuff up. And I have recently picked up a bunch of books, and just looking at them, it's like, oh, okay, this is photography. Like when I was going to Japan and taking my camera, I was just taking photos of cars and random things around, and a lot of boring stuff, and editing really crap, and doing all these like terrible things after I've been taking photos for a couple of years. And I thought, I wish I had been told to look at good work, or had a good way to find books that would influence me, or like a resource. Like if you went to university or something and you studied photography, you'd have a teacher showing you this person and this, and like, here's another book, read this, try this. And I feel like that, like people that do that get a leg up in terms of photography work, and actually sort of work that means a lot. Whereas if you just learn how to use a camera, it's like, once you learn how to do manual settings and take photos and what aperture does and everything like that, you can kind of get away with doing work stuff. But actually looking at work that's important and has sort of influenced a lot of people and done everything like that is probably more important. So I wish I was able to go back and just tell myself, hey, buy some books, look at all this stuff, learn from the greats, and look at what good photography work is, rather than just looking at Instagram cliches and other stuff like that, which even I did when I started off. It's like, you get a camera, you get an f1.8 50mm lens, and you just go shoot everything wide open and just take a bunch of photos and do like random stuff. And I wasted just a lot of good photographic opportunities by not having looked at good work and stuff like that. Did that make sense? I think.
Yeah, I mean, are you sort of saying that there's a difference between a photograph and a picture in a sense?
Yeah, like I did a lot of just snapshot photography, just like, oh, here's something that I like, ka-ching, take a photo, didn't think about it, didn't really do anything or try. And then it's like, now I look at it and I'm like, I wish I was there with a different camera so I wouldn't have shot it at f1.8 because I had an f1.8. I wish I'd have stopped it down or actually thought about the composition. I just spent a long time doing, things that looked nice on your phone when you looked at it quickly swiping through rather than things that actually mean something or could be printed or used as a good photograph, I guess.
Okay. I mean, I think that's really solid advice. I'm thinking back to all the times that I've been to like New York or San Francisco and or Las Vegas. I've been to a few times and I've come away really disappointed with the photos that I've had. And I think you're right. There is a huge difference between like actually thinking about it and analyzing, the scene and bringing in that knowledge of having seen great photos as opposed to just pointing your camera at a thing that you find interesting and just clicking the shutter. There's definitely a big difference there. The most important thing we do with the podcast, and the reason that I do this entirely is because I want as many people as possible to find your work. So where can they go to find your photos? What's your Instagram and also your YouTube channel? Please link away.
Yeah, so YouTube's just Lewis Williamson, Lewis for Lewis, and then Williamson's pretty simple. And then Instagram is loser_Lewis. And yeah, those are the two main spots. The website's linked to the Instagram, but that's pretty much just there in case someone actually wants me to do work or something for them, but it doesn't really get used that often or not really that updated. But yeah, so YouTube, I'm trying to do a lot more stuff there. And then, yeah, Instagram's just a few uploads a week. So, yeah.
Well, I feel like YouTube's become very stagnant in the sense that it seems to be the same 5 or 6 people that everyone watches and everyone has the same format, the same music, the same everything for their YouTube. So you were an absolute breath of fresh air. And for people that like portraits and for people that like film, I would absolutely recommend that they find your YouTube channel because it'll be really exciting for them. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Those were such kind words. Thank you.